Director of MichAuto and also serve on the management team as a Vice President here at the Detroit Regional Chamber. We're glad you could join us. I'm going to make my comments very brief here before we introduce the moderator, the panelists, and then our presenter. But what I want to do basically is set the stage for you. We've been working very closely with one of our major members in McKinsey Company, and they have done a survey that's looking at the state of Black tech talent, and particularly in Detroit, but also Metro Detroit, but we can apply it to Michigan as well. But we're going to center on Detroit, Metro Detroit. There's a lot of good things happening. If you've been to Black Tech Saturdays, I've been a couple times. I highly encourage you to go do that. Down at Michigan Central, the Turnages and their team are doing an incredible job. But we're also lagging. When we look at educational attainment levels and we look at the jobs of the future, there's no question that digitalization is here and it's going to continue to proliferate across all jobs. So the state of readiness, the state of our tech talent is very, very important. So with that, I want to introduce to you our speakers today. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the survey findings from Horace Tiggs the fourth, and he is a partner in the Detroit office, McKinsey Company, and he's going to walk you through the survey. When he's done with his brief introductory comments and a review of that survey, I'll come back on and we'll introduce the panelists and the moderator. So with that, Horace, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us.
Outstanding. Thank you, Glenn, for that tee up, and welcome everyone. Appreciate everyone taking a little bit of time to spend with us here to talk a little bit about Black tech talent. So I will do my best to tee this up and put this quart in a pint. We can go to the next slide, Andrea. Thank you. So we've been doing a Black Executive Summit for the past couple of years with McKinsey, and over the past, let's call it 2 to 3 years, we've really started to settle in on this theme of Black tech talent. And so to lay a little bit of the groundwork here before we get into the findings of the survey from this year, we really were looking at 2 logical problem statements, I would argue, over the past couple of years. Problem statement number 1 really is all around, what's the impact of not having Black tech talent in technology roles in terms of the impact on the individual, as well as the impact on the region. So that's actually a problem space that we explored at our in prep for our 2023 summit. And then for 2024, we built on that a little bit to try to do a double click and really understand, all right, what are the headwinds that companies in the metro market are facing when it comes to the identification of that talent, the attraction of that talent, the matriculation of that talent into their enterprise or their companies, and then the advancement of that talent. And so I'll share a little bit about kind of how we define that talent, what are those roles, what are the impacts, and then what are some of the findings here. If we go to the next slide, Andrea, to lay the groundwork here, really, what we're thinking about is, as we define tech talent, we really define that across a diaspora of about 7 roles that you see on the screen here. So everything from data scientists and cybersecurity on your left, all the way to IT project management and database, DBAs and things of that nature. What you'll find is that in the market, nationally, the Black tech talent workforce is about 12%. The Black talent in the overall workforce is about 12% of the workforce. And so what you're seeing here is 2 logical pieces. You're seeing the tremendous growth in the demand for tech talent, represented by some of these blue bars, where you're seeing really significant growth, specifically in data science and cybersecurity and software development. But then you're also seeing a very significant underrepresentation of Black talent in those roles at parity across the space, where of the 7 roles that we've identified as tech, only one of them really is at parity in terms of Black tech talent in the workforce to percentage of Black tech talent in that role, and that's specifically in IT project management. And we can move to the next page, Andrea. And so what we're then seeing is, just codifying the fact that the demand for the talent is there, right? So we forecast that, there's going to be somewhere between a 20 to 30% increase in tech talent demand over the course of the next, through the rest of the decade. You couple that then with the fact that there's only going to be about a 5 to 10% increase in bachelor degrees for tech talent, which means we're going to be significantly undersupplied if we're not actively, pushing for placement there. The other thing that we're seeing is, with that lack of Black tech talent, we're also seeing potential continued atrophying in diversity goals within organizations. Historically, what we've seen is, about 34% of those entry roles are women, about 20% of those are actually of the degrees being earned are some combination of Black and or women. So this is really our supply demand issue. Next slide for me, please, Andrea. If you think about this in terms of the financial impact, what we're saying is, nationally, there's about a $40 billion impact here. Within the metro market specifically, we're talking about a $3 billion, wage disparity in tech talent. That's just, wage disparity and the absence of that tech talent in the local market, and the 40% growth between, let's call it 23 and 30, of that disparity actually outpaces the national numbers. So the national numbers are about 37%. So in the metro market, we're really seeing that the impact of that lack of tech talent is going to have a larger proportional impact on financials and the impact there. Next page for me. The last T up here, and then I'll get into some of the findings, is there is codified benefit to having a diverse workforce, specifically Black tech talent, and Black tech talent in executive leadership positions in companies, right? So we've seen positive return on invested capital impacts. We've seen positive economic profit, and we've also seen positive economic growth, right? And so there's not necessarily the causation versus correlation between the two, but in general, what we see is, the more diverse your company is, the more your company is able to take advantage of not just that diverse talent, but also Black talent in the ecosystem. The bigger, bump you will get in your business and some of the financial outcomes from your business. Which then next slide for me, Andrea. Which then leads us to the findings. That's all the tee up. The findings from this year really is we executed a survey and identified some pockets in three logical areas. One is all around education and capability. So how do we identify and source the talent? The second pocket is all around hiring. How do we get that talent in the door? And then the third is how do we retain that talent? And that retention actually sits across two vectors. One vector is around the ability to retain the talent within an organization or an enterprise. The other vector is how do we actually retain that talent in terms of startups, VCs, things of that nature. How do we retain that in the local Michigan ecosystem? And so with that, we'll run through seven really quick, next slide for me, Andrea, please. Run through seven quick findings, right? And these are going to be key. So the first finding is that the Black talent pipeline in Michigan is significantly underserved, right? And when we define this significant underserving, what we're really saying is that, if you take a look at the population of or the denominator, for lack of better words, of Black tech talent or Black talent in Michigan, and then you juxtapose that with the number of degrees being granted at our public institutions. Michigan ranks 47th out of 50th across the nation in terms of the ratio between the supply we have to feed these entities versus the output that's coming out on the back end, right? So there's a significant opportunity to make a play there. The second thing that we're seeing is also for the talent that is coming out of the pipeline on the back end, almost half of that talent is leaving the state within 2 years, right? And they're going to where you think they would be going, right? So they're going to the perceived tech centers, whether that's the West Coast, whether that's some places in Texas, whether that's some places in Georgia, or whether it's some places up in the Northeast where there are well-established innovation, incubation, technology centers, and so they're just leaving the metro. The third thing that we're seeing is that almost three-quarters of companies in the metro market are saying that they haven't been successful at hitting their targets with respect to Black tech talent, right? And the biggest reasons for this are a combination of, you know, the pipe's just not there, right? Going back to one and two. Second, for the pipe that is there, do they have the right skills and capabilities to do the job at the level that the job needs to be done from a technical prowess perspective? And then third, do they have the right work base to effectively enter the market? So that's a challenge space in terms of hiring because it hinders companies from the jump. The fourth piece is really, although we're producing higher STEM graduates than the national average, and when I say we in this case, I mean the state of Michigan. State of Michigan is pumping out, I want to say it was the seventh most STEM graduates across the nation. Um, the black, the black percentage of that is still critically small. So it's about 11%, of that population that is making it through, that is winding up in these tech roles. And then last slide for me, Andrea. I've got three more points, and then I will land this plane. The fifth piece is, and there is good, right? So these are challenges. There's also good, right? So we're actually saying that three-quarters of the companies that we've surveyed in the metro market, if they can overcome all of those headwinds that we just talked about, they are actually able to meet, they're able to retain, and they're able to grow, right? So there are really strong forces around let's call it the matriculation and the retention of that talent once we get the talent in. And then these last two pieces really around retention are really going to focus more so less about the individual and more so about the entities that actually tend to pull some of these individuals in. What we're seeing is that 65% of Black small business owners are having the toughest time accessing capital. And if they can't access capital, they can't grow their business. If they can't grow their business and they want to retain that business, they have to go to the sources where that growth is. And so you're seeing that migration. And then the last, which then leads to that seventh and last point, right? Which is, you know, if we look at the, over 200 startups that have been founded in Michigan in the past, decade or so, half of them have left the state, and they're taking the jobs with them. They're taking the investments with them because they're going to maintain they're going to keep their businesses alive. And so we've identified these things, and I believe the panel, as we start to get into this, is going to talk a bit about, not just the reality of the headwinds, but how do we actually take some of this data and then put proactive actions and measures in place to try to turn the tide here. So with that, I just put two quarts in one pint, but that's what we found over the past handful of years. So looking forward to this discussion, and with that, I will hand it back over to Glenn.
Horace, thank you to you and your team. Thank you for that great setup for this panel. Just a couple of things as we transition here. I think everybody understands this, but you reinforce digitalization and tech talent is growing across all industries. It's our focus at MichAuto, it's our focus at the chamber, because if we don't have this tech talent to grow, and it's not inclusive, Detroit can't grow, Michigan can't grow, we can't lift people up, and we can't drive innovation. And to join us today to talk about this, we have several panelists. So I'm going to introduce each one of them and then turn it over to our moderator. First, we have Jill Bright. Jill is the Chief Transformation Officer for One Magnify. Thanks for joining us, Jill. Second, we have Ida Bird Hill, a friend of ours and someone who's very passionate about this. As you will see, she is the CEO and founder of Automation Works. Ida, thanks. It's good to see you again. And then we have Nando Felton. Nando is the community manager for Google Code Next Detroit. And I'm glad you were able to join us, Nando. He also is very involved in our UDrive platform and is one of our creators and influencers to show exactly what he's doing across social media platforms. So thank you, Nando. And then we have Dwayne Green, who is the Senior Director for Supplier Inclusion, Diversity, and Impact at Kelly. Dwayne, thank you for joining us too. And I will turn it over to our moderator, Aaron Aboagye, and he is the Managing Partner of Detroit for McKinsey and Company. So Aaron, I'm going to turn this whole session over to you, let you take it home and close it out. And again, thanks to the McKinsey team and for everybody for joining us today.
Super. Thank you, Glenn, for the introductions and for setting this up. And Horace, thank you for taking us to the content. Big welcome to our panelists. I hope in the spirit of dialogue, let's make this a discussion. I have some questions, but frankly, I hope that the discussion takes a natural course and we just have a dialogue about this, right? So maybe before we get started, maybe where we start from is, in Horace's presentation, our research is showing that pipeline is one of the biggest issues we have, right? And pipeline, we would define as a combination of the education, right? So how are we training enough Black residents to go into STEM fields and be ready for tech, and also the hiring process, right? Maybe let's start with Nando. Nando, given your role, right? Would love to hear what experiences you've had or what challenges you see in building the pipelines, because you work with young Black kids at a very early stage, right? So we'd love to hear your personal experiences or what you see as the challenges in building that pipeline for Detroit.
Definitely. Thank you, Aaron. I'm happy to be here today, everybody. And so one of the things that I've seen is an impact and as a setback really comes into play is we think about the narrative of exposure around STEM. A lot of times all we talk about is introductory sessions and or exposure when we really have to think about excellence. So the same way I'm able to build STEM playgrounds around the city, a lot of you can probably leave your neighborhoods and see tons of physical playgrounds around for kids to play. And something that I've fallen and realized is that we don't have those same playgrounds for students to learn. And so that lack of excellence really plays into effect of just the essence of just wanting to expose kids to STEM. So that's what I've seen, Aaron, is the lack of excellence and only wanting to expose them to STEM, really realizing that there has to be practice. Michael Jordan didn't just become great when he walked into the basketball court. There was those countless nights and days that we didn't see behind the scenes of him working, perfecting his craft. And that's the same way we should approach our students. We have to realize that, the gap within the education, the gap within the wealth is going to keep rising and growing. This city has so much untapped talent, so much potential talent. And the thing is, we have to really find a way to harness it and to bring it to life.
I love the energy, Nando. I think what you're doing with the young kids is great, right? Because that's where it starts from. That's really the foundation of all of this. And in our experience, the education piece is not easy, right? So, you're not tackling an easy problem. Why don't we get similar views? Ida, you've been in the throes of this. You were actually with us last year when we started this topic. Would love to hear from you, your thoughts on where the biggest rocks are, right? Where the biggest challenges are as you see them.
Well, the biggest challenge is the lack of exposure to algebra. We realized that in 2004, 2005. So I served on a delegation that fought to change the graduation requirements of the state of Michigan because we realized that the only required course at the time to graduate was civics, and that you had 40 years of people who had never seen algebra. If they were on the college preparatory track, which was about 20% of the students, they saw algebra. But if you were not on college preparatory track, you never saw algebra for your entire middle school or high school years. So when we say that people are not interested in STEM, we forget that that happened here in Michigan. And so really the first class that really was required to have algebra was the graduating class of 2011. And what we saw is a lot of students struggled. A lot of them dropped out because they didn't want to take the algebra. So as Automation Works, we are a post-secondary tech certification training. We recognize that, and we don't require algebra for people to come to us. We do test for applied algebra because what we notice is that if you haven't really weren't good at algebra, you are afraid of the abstract nature of mathematics. And if I could strip that and get you to do problem solving, because that's the only reason why we need the algebra is to teach people how to solve problems, then I can educate them for middle skill tech certification careers in tech, which is what we do. Our highest graduate is at 166,000. 30% of our graduates are above 80,000, and most of them do not have a degree. But they go through a very rigorous process with us for a year of soft skills, cultural adaptive skills, and of course, technical skills, just so that we can get them through the process of understanding at least of applied algebra, applied geometry, and then all of the numerical that comes with technology.
That's great. And Dwayne, you sit in a privileged position, right? You see them you see them when they're done with school and all that, right? And they're ready to enter the workforce. What's your view on, where the challenges lie?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I agree with our panelist that has previously spoken, and there's certainly challenges around, education. There's challenges around funding, but we certainly can see as an organization that hires over 300,000 individuals on an annual basis, supporting many of the Fortune 500 companies. Technology continues to be one of the greatest, highest demand categories that we are looking to fill and identify talent. Skills gaps, continues to be a big barrier. Limited access to education and training, and many, Black tech workers. We certainly see access to networks that continues to be a challenge as well. Informal technology networks play a significant role in hiring, and Black tech professionals often they lack this access to these networks. And then industry barriers. There's some systemic biases in the tech industry that make it challenging to hire, retain, and promote Black tech workers. And then we also see, despite all the best efforts around DE&I within organizations, the progress has remained slow, and the initiatives lack meaningful impact. And so those are some of the challenges that we as a community must solve as we go forward in this space.
I think that's apt. We will, Dwayne, we will come back to this. I want to come back and talk about, we're talking a lot about the pipeline, right? I want to come back and talk about the demand side and, challenges and what we really should be doing differently to create demand. But maybe Jill, why don't we turn to you for some thoughts on what you see as, the challenges in building this pipeline.
Yeah, and it is challenging. I mean, our best intentions and wanting to create, more diverse workplaces, have, a representative workforce that reflects our clients and the broader population is tricky. As an employer, we're faced with, needing to get as highly skilled workers as possible online quickly. We use assessments in many instances, and while we've made some good progress, we're still behind. We've partnered with an organization called Experience IT in Michigan, which is a group of employers that helps mentor, train, and then hire talent in the Michigan area for tech. It's not exclusively for diverse talent, but we've tried to focus that way. But it is difficult. I think of it as a holistic challenge, and the great, work that's been presented here kind of points to that. So it's ensuring that, Black tech talent stays in school, gets the training they need, gets access to mathematics, the kinds of assessments that companies, put people through so that they can, enter as a candidate in as strong a position as possible. So I think it's going to take more partnership between training, mentoring, companies, education, to ensure that we can bolster the pipeline.
Very helpful. So, I think you have all spoken about, I think Ida talked about applied algebra, right? Basically just getting people exposure. Nando, I like what you said about, you know, drawing the parallels to the natural things that kids see around them, and how do you make STEM natural for them? How do you make tech natural for them, right? Um, are there any challenges in what I'll call maybe the education system, the, you know, basically in the environment, that make these problems even more severe? So we've talked about some specific issues, right? But are there statewide problems or problems in legislation, in general, that make this even more challenging?
Yeah, of course. I'll go ahead with that, Aaron. So one thing that I realize is in Michigan, there is not a state requirement for computer science courses in the state of Michigan. So when you come down and you trickle down from that effect, it shows. And you then I go around to schools multiple times, and I realize that a lot of times these students have never had experience working in and around engineering. I asked a lot of them, especially eighth graders going to high school, have you ever thought about being an engineer? A couple hands will go up, and then after demonstrations and highlighting and showcasing, what they can do, tons of hands go up. But I think that goes back to the root cause of that there isn't a focus on wanting to push tech at a young age. And as Ida said, that articulation and be able to complete mathematical skills at a young age of even second grade, lots of research around that shows that they have to have these algebra skills. I myself, if I think about my own high school, I graduated high school in 2016. It wasn't that long ago. The highest level of math I had at the time was algebra 2, and the school realized that we had to have at least pre-calculus for us to even go to college. And so with that being said, that wasn't that long ago, and the system in effect, it isn't allowing us, if we have to master these skills at a younger age to then be able to compute. But one thing I found through research and even working with the youth is that if they have those common literacy skills, they are able to code, they are able to write code, design websites, create video games, and the sense of fun around that is honestly, Aaron, what I think would hope, and to be a differing factor in the fact that students will be able to have fun, see themselves within cartoons, see themselves within the good side of media, and say, hey, I can be like Batman, I can be like Iron Man, and now I'm able to create my own pathway within this field. I think that's the beauty within tech, is that once you tie that that dream of a student, always wanted to play and create, it allows them so many different instances where they can do that.
That's great. Ida, you were nodding as Nando was speaking. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, in 2015, I saw some data from Pew Research that says that 83% of Black teens play video games. But yet, I very rarely hear of an employer using video gaming as a skill. And people go, but why? I don't know, because people forget that video games were not created by Electronic Arts. They were actually created by the Department of Defense for the express purpose of training, because it's a skill. And so when you watch young people playing these sophisticated video games, you realize they have very strong problem-solving skills, because the games throws things at them that are unknown, and they're able to navigate and be able to resolve those things that are unknown without a textbook. Now, they may go out and get cheat codes, but notice they go get the cheat codes. They're not reading a book to play the game. They're just moving forward because they have the skills of being able to solve a problem. We use video gaming as a way to test whether someone has the ability to build an algorithm, because that's all technology is you're building step-by-step instructions to have the computer do something for you. I don't necessarily need you to be able to do algebra abstractly to do that, but I do need you to be able to solve a problem and think in steps. And so we created a coaching app that does that, and how I select my learners, and we're dead on. The irony of it all is some of the students that we have brought on board who are doing very, very well were D&E students in high school, because the high schools do very little hands-on content, whether it's algebra, whether it's statistics. They do very little case studies that relate to real life. And so young people get turned off by the time they get to seventh and eighth grade. And so what we realize is that there needs to be more real life content. And only that could come, those case studies and that content can only come from corporate America because we know what we want our young people to have and what skills we're looking for. So I just believe that video gaming with case studies really will change the trajectory of what comes out of K through 12 and what goes into post-secondary.
Very helpful, Ida. Actually, that's a good segue to the question that I pushed back for Dwayne, right? Which is, and Dwayne and Jill, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What should companies, corporate America, be doing? You know, because there's on the demand side, right? What should they be doing to drive or create more demand for Black talent? Or what are you seeing companies do or not doing on that front?
I'll go first, Dwayne, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Jill.
When I looked at the study and the results, I thought of many things. One, I think employers can do something more on the front end while students are in training to help them economically, because we're losing too few who don't stay to finish a program, and I'm guessing economics probably plays a pretty big role in that. So if there's something an employer could do with a commitment of hiring, but to front some funding that would enable them to finish, that was just one idea. Ida's nodding, so that means hopefully that was a good idea. But I think that that's something we could think about. And then how do employers spend more of their time working with educational institutions to say, this is how we assess. These are the things we look for. These are the skills assessments we give. And creating that dialogue in that forum, I'm thinking I could share. And then Ida, as an example here again, might say, and Jill, you guys need to use gamification more. And here's how you could incorporate that into what you're doing. And that might help you find the Black tech talent that you need in a different way, with like a different lens. So I think that more of discussions like this one and forums for us to really share with each other the challenges, that might be on the supply side, as well as the challenges employers have on the demand side, would help.
That's
Yeah,
great,
Aaron.
Dwayne.
I certainly would agree. I think there is a bit of a disconnect when we think about, what the business need is versus what's being taught through the educational system. And being able to close that gap, understanding what truly is, what are the skills and requirements that are going to be important for the business, not just today, but in the future. And how do we really kind of get ahead of that curve? So that takes investment, that takes that collaboration, it takes a lot of involvement by both parties, the business community as well as the educational community, in terms of making sure that you are identifying what's truly important, and then being able to go into the community and find individuals who are really have that interest and stimulating that interest and you have to start at a younger age. I think we in many cases don't start at a younger age, really trying to provide that interest in technology so that individuals are more apt to want to go down that road. And to Ida's point, how do we make it interesting and fun, right? And not just a task that needs to get done, but getting the technology something that is going to stimulate interest, creativity as they try to build out where technology is going in the future. And so I think investment, I think it's about creating collaboration with business community and colleges and universities, as well as, the K through 12. And then making sure that it's we're creating opportunity and space for creativity and fun for individuals that get involved.
So it's interesting, right, Dwayne? You're just talking about make it more fun. We're talking about using games, right? But as parents, we're also at the same time trying to get kids off these devices, right? So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, right? How do you take that interest and channel it into the right way where it's real learning and not, goofing around on devices and things like that, right? But I want to pick up on something, Dwayne, you and Jill just talked about, right? Which is what companies can do to help, right? But what are the channels, right? Because I worry that at an individual company level, there's limited change you can make. So how should businesses think about driving that systemic change that trains a pipeline for what, builds the skills in the pipeline that they're going to need 5 years, 10 years from now?
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think about, on a broader scale, how do we, address some of the challenges that are out there? I start thinking about, how do we upskill and reskill, right? Making sure that as an employer, we're investing in training apprenticeships, we're investing in boot camps, we're looking at second chance hiring to help promote and engage, Black professionals that transition into tech roles. I also think about, what are we doing from a intentional recruiting strategy, right? How do we partner with HBCUs and other community organizations that focus on engaging and driving recruitment for individuals who may not necessarily have be focused in this area? And then as an organization, we also need to be thinking about, how do we promote, more diversity in leadership? Black professionals in leadership roles through mentorship and internal development programs. Those are things that I think we all, as corporations, need to be focused on driving more into the pipeline, but not just driving more, Black techs into the pipeline, but being able to retain individuals who are going down this particular field.
Good. Ida, so you are on the sort of the side of this where you're training the talent to go into the workforce, right? What should businesses do to make your life easier, to help you scale more, right? Make it easier for you to, prepare more talent for them.
First of all, to provide internships, not just for people in college, but at any age bracket. There's nothing like hands-on experience or on-the-job training, and you don't always need to have an apprenticeship to do that. The last couple years, we've been experimenting with something called virtual internships. And when we first introduced it, we had a couple of companies. One that stood out the most was MasterCard, because when we started having a conversation, it sounded crazy on surface. Because what I asked them for was to give me a live case study that you would expect an entry-level worker to be able to do in your firm. So they actually gave us a case study. They gave us on how they wanted the assignment done, and then what the finished deliverables should be. And so our learners now submit those assignments directly to MasterCard beyond just us, because they use it as a recruiting tool. And guess what? What we discovered, people are a little bit more talented than you think. The problem is a lot of times they don't even know what's expected of them. And so when a corporation gets that involved in the curriculum and then turns around can write a check, even if it's not a full job but a stipend, that does something to a young people's mindset. It changes what they look like, it changes what they do, it changes the way that the education looks. And so we noticed that with our learners, they got a lot more serious. They made more money because now they're able to handle a cybersecurity attack and then create a PowerPoint presentation to say, this is what we did, and show the analysis of how they were able to solve it. That's a whole different conversation than just talking about theory. So I think that you don't necessarily have to always have a full-fledged job, but you can provide a virtual internship with stipends, which is really easy to do because you do it on the assessment side anyway in HR. The point is now let's expand it so that it actually looks like a real assignment that someone would do at a company. And we would love to have lots of those because I don't necessarily need to have a company as a body. I do need someone to lead the case study and to be able to work it out the way that it looks like for that company, and then to associate a stipend to it. And that would right there would change the trajectory a lot because a lot of Black people don't go to college because they have to earn a living. They don't have the ability just to go and spend 4 years and not produce income for their families.
Very, very interesting. Ida, do you worry though that with the sophistication of the growth of the tech industry, I love the idea of the stipends and what you're doing with MasterCard. The question is, how should we think about the portion that should take advantage of programs like that versus the portion of our Black residents who should be aiming to go into 4-year programs so they can get into, maybe it's a different level of tech jobs and so on, right?
Well, when you do tech certification, it kind of blends because even if you get a degree in this day and age, you still have to get tech certifications. Companies just want that. They want to know that you know what you're doing with Cisco equipment. They want to know you know what you're doing with AWS. So even with the degree, you have to get a certification. What we do is the opposite. They get the certification first. And once you get on the certification path, you are now a lifelong learner because you're not going to keep your job without continual certification. It just is what it is. But what we notice is that individuals who get the certification, particularly since a lot of the providers allow credits to be matriculated to four-year institutions, they on their own go back once they start making money. Because in order to keep their jobs or to grow, they have to. And so what we did is just change the trajectory. So instead of getting the degree first and getting the certification, you get the certification first, and now it puts you on the degree path. Because once you start making $80,000 to $100,000, you're going to do whatever's necessary to keep that and keep moving down that path.
That's helpful. Nando, you are doing this from the Google lens, right? And you're creating great exposure to this. What lessons have you learned as you've done this, right? And how do we, I come back to this word of scaling, right? How do employers like Google, but others, right, scale what you're doing so you can have, because I see your program as a feeder into Ida's program, and then Dwayne will go create jobs for them, Jill will hire them. That's a bit of the cycle here, right? So how do employers scale what you're doing?
Yeah. So what I've seen across the board is, and even being a product of Detroit schools, is that at a lot of times there's a lack of investment. So right now, we have to invest in tech. We have to invest in our students. We have to find ways to close the industry gap to the classroom.
Mhm.
One thing I've seen, and being able to work with companies like Google, Ford, and Michigan Central, where I get to work at, is realizing that representation on a global scale of saying, "Hey, look, we can use these companies, and these employees are going to actually run and be volunteers to help you learn how to code," is invaluable. The same way that we all know about certain companies that we love to wear for our shoes, or certain companies that we love to play video games for. Now imagine if they invested back into the classroom. A lot of students want to be athletes. A lot of students want to play sports. And little do they know about how much technology from head to toe of an NFL player that they can actually be incorporated with. The Google office is inside a Little Caesars Arena. And so I like to tell kids, I get to ball differently, and really tying in, really tying into who we are as individuals, and coming with a selfless self into these places and spaces, and remembering that not too long ago we were in those shoes, and what would we have wanted. And one thing I've seen with research, I've worked on NSF grants in and outside of college. I'm seeing that at one time I was the only kid in there essentially without a PhD in a couple of settings, and all the researchers were thinking about how they can take something away from these students. But in my mind, all I thought about is what can we give them to take away. And so really focusing on giving them tangible skills and assets that they can help and articulate with. And we just give them the plan. And then when we leave from them, they're able to continue working on that. Because that's honestly at times with capacity, bandwidth of individuals in professional settings, that their job doesn't allow them to do what I get to do, and talk to kids every single day. I get to lobby for kids. I get to say, hey, I know someone in this department. I know someone in this company, in this industry. You want to build a new robot using AI? Hey, I got someone to talk to. All of us in the professional setting don't get to do that. And so where it comes in is to say, hey, I can call on Aaron. I can call on Jill. I can call on Ida, and we would love for you to just be there. And I think that's what we have to remember, is that investment is a return. So in the companies from 10 to 15 years from now, not even 10 to 15, these kids are 14 and 15. So within 5 years, that return on investment is pretty fast if we're able to give them those skill sets now to really work on that.
Awesome. That is really cool. So let's switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about the startup ecosystem in Detroit a bit, right? The tech startup ecosystem, because, as much as we talk about the corporate jobs and so on, I think in Horace's data or his presentation, we talk about a lot of startups are not able to scale in Detroit or in Michigan, right? They move out of the state. Ivan, Nando, the talent you're creating, right, also feeds the startup ecosystem, right? What, any thoughts on how how these startups are, how we should be thinking about making sure these innovations, these startups actually remain and scale in Michigan?
I'm going to jump in on that one right away. First of all, making investment capital available. I have to remind people Automation Works in itself is a startup. We had our first class in 2020. And I got a rude awakening in 2022 when I decided I was going to start my fundraising process. So I got into an accelerator in Boston, which is the EdTech capital of the world. And to sit next to people at Harvard, MIT, who thought my company was valued, but when I'm in Detroit, there is no value. I almost left Detroit. I got an offer from Tulsa, $1 million to come to Tulsa. And boy, I almost left because raising capital in Michigan for a Black person is very, very tough. Now, we just kicked off our first seed round, and I have to be honest with you, not one serious investor in the state of Michigan. We've had people from California, we've had people from London, all up and down the eastern seacoast, but none in Michigan. But I'm in Michigan. Even so much so that as we were beginning this process, we get a call from Buffalo, New York, which is cold, which I'm not going there, that says, if you move to Buffalo, we'll give you $1 million in cash, but not in Michigan. So we have to really put our money where our mouth is. If you really want innovation to stay in Michigan, you're going to have to fund it. You're going to have to write a check. It's one thing to say, attaboy, you did a wonderful job. But at the end of the day, that doesn't pay payroll. It doesn't pay the expenses that it takes to run a startup. And right now, we are not seeing that investment capital going towards Black startups.
Nando, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that insight. And honestly, I think about this just back to a K through 12 perspective. A lot of times, if you think about where this talent is, the resources that they're given, they start on, I would say, if anyone follows baseball or softball, they start on negative third base, meaning that a lot of times their peers are able to just start on third base and walk into the park, and they're able to land jobs at high paying tech companies, and they've already had the skill sets of what it's like to learn multiple computer languages, if that's C plus or Python or Swift, and they're well equipped because they've already experienced that. When a lot of times students I get to work with, they're never even shown those skills. They're never even shown how they can use their phone to create an app, how they can use a laptop, all these devices around them. They're never shown how they can pick it up and make one themselves. And so going back into wanting to just even retain talent, if you think about Michigan, it's one of the biggest exporters of not just talent, but of things in general. I mean, think about the automotive company here. And right now, my focus is really to empower people, empower students to say, hey, I can be a part of this. I'm going to stay. And that's the same way I think about investing as well. If everything is leaving from Michigan, why would an investor want to put something into Michigan? I was just a part of Crane's homecoming in Detroit, and all the people there had ties and roots to Michigan, but none of them lived there. But a lot of their goals was wanting to invest back into Detroit. And so even for myself, just working within the tech space, of course, you have dreams and ideas of having a startup, and then you kind of go down this pathway and say, hey, I have this idea, but okay, Nando, you're gonna have to go to New York to meet this person. You're gonna have to go to California. Um, and right now, I'm happy to say I am a part of the ecosystem that is actually trying to change that narrative. I'm sitting in the first tenant space in the newly renovated train station. For me, the only way I can really describe it is a responsibility. If a kid can see that train station, they can then be able to work inside of it. And so for me, I'm going to continuously advocate and push for that. But at the end of the day, I'm 26 years old and I don't have $1 million to my name, so I can't write those checks. But what I can do is say, hey, so-and-so student, I want you to not be afraid to pick up this phone call and share your idea, share your dreams. And that's what I'm able to do. But yes, Aaron, I have seen that there is a lack thereof of investments and finding opportunities, especially for kids in Detroit. I mean, you think about it, there's only two schools that come to mind if you think about Detroit, Cass Tech and Renaissance, maybe King. I'm not trying to exploit Detroit. I'm never trying to overlook Detroit. There's tens of thousands of students, if not hundreds of thousands, that are outside of those schools. Well, that's what we have to think about. That's what we have to focus on my end, within my perspective.
Very helpful. Jill, any thoughts on this? Because your lens is a little different, right, from the corporate side or from the company, the business side.
Yeah, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking about all the things I need to do, Aaron. So I have to create a case study. I have to do that. I'm thinking that I want to go over to Ida and over to Nando and just chat with their students and talk about what being in a professional workplace is like and why that's as important a skill to have and possess as the technical skills. So I've got a long list of things I need to do. And I think it's just indicative of the fact that we all have a lot more work to do and a lot more work to do together. Because without the collaboration, companies are driven to have to, get the work done for their clients. And that means they've got to hire the talent that can do that. And it's got to be skilled, it's got to be fast, it's got to be easy to onboard. And that dynamic doesn't help the folks who need, the training and development the most. And so recognizing that obligation and what we have to do, I think is just key.
That's great. That's good. I love the commitments you're making right here, Jill. That's excellent. Dwayne, you have a privileged lens. I keep saying that because you see both sides, right? You see the pipeline, you see what the businesses are trying to do, right? How do we make this whole issue, right? How do we make this a more important or high priority issue for businesses in Michigan, right? There are a lot of people on the webinar today from different companies, right? How does each organization make this a top priority?
Well, if you ask a CEO of an organization what keeps them up at night, I'll guarantee it's talent. The challenge of finding good talent. And as I'm listening to Nando and Ida and Jill, it's like I need to tap more into them because certainly have their finger on the pulse of how do you drive more blacks in tech, right? How do you drive more talent in tech through a variety of means? But I think from a corporate perspective, we have to continually think about our overall strategy around recruitment and how do we fill that pipeline. And we have to be very intentional about the work that we do. We have to be tapping into, again, organizations that are out in the community around upskilling. How do we make sure that we're investing in that training component? And we also need to be looking at making sure that we as a corporation are setting very defined metrics and measurable goals and being able to really understand, are we making progress of representation around promotional rates and salary equity? So all those pieces together help us really drive to solutions that make good sense as an organization. We also have to be tapping into leveraging our ERGs, right? How do we make sure we're engaging individuals in the organization that can provide support and educate the organizations around what the challenges are faced by underrepresented minorities, and being able to bring that forward to help reduce turnover, improve retention, and help build the needs of the business. And then lastly, and I talked about it briefly around corporate partnerships, we as an organization have to continue to look how we form partnerships with nonprofit organizations, government organizations, and educational institutions to build a diverse talent pipeline.
Excellent. So we could go on and on. I'm looking at the clock, and I'm sure there are people who are eyeing me saying we're coming up. We have about 5 minutes left. I'd like to do just reflective round, right? And maybe Jill, we start with you, but just, what do you want folks to take away from the dialogue today? Or, as folks go back to their normal lives, right? What messages do you want folks to take away regarding growing Black tech talent in Detroit?
Yeah, I guess the one thing I've been thinking about this whole time is it's very important to be a role model. And I think we all do a lot to be that role model, that positive force for change and someone who can be looked at and respected. But action is key. If it's great to be a role model, but if we're not each doing our part to help one kid, two kids, three kids, get jobs, get training, get, their chance, then we really haven't done our full job.
Excellent. Ida?
I would like the corporate leaders to walk away that there's an easy fix to scale. To me, the scaling happens in the curriculum, whether it's K through 12, whether it's post-secondary, because oftentimes the curriculum for schools stays very static, but corporate America is turning over their strategy and what they're doing every 3 to 5 years. And the schools just are not keeping up. And we really need corporate leaders is helping us to devise the curriculum that you need in order to get the skills that you want. And that to me is an easier fix than coming to a classroom because it requires less time, but it scales across millions and millions of people quickly.
Excellent. Thank you, Ida. Nando?
Yeah, for me, I would just go back to the kids, honestly. It's the youth voice and finding ways that we can raise that voice, finding ways that we can spark their interest at a young age. I'm really giving them something tangible to walk away with. And just think about if when we do sit in these roles within industry, within these big companies, is how do we recruit young talent early? How do we invest early? I'm going to really let that matriculate and exponentially grow. And I think if we can do that collectively, then I don't see why we can't have all of us be those leaders and those advocates in those spaces.
Excellent. Thank you, Nando. Dwayne?
Yeah, I think as I, reflect on the comments made here throughout this entire conversation, I think as good corporate citizens, we need to move beyond performative DEI actions and focus on sustainable systemic change that we can affect. I think that we need to be really reinvesting in on-the-job training that can bypass some of the educational barriers that are out there. And then we need to focus on the advancement to ensure that Black tech professionals can thrive and grow. How do we do that? How do we make sure that we are really driving effective change across the organization and across the business community?
That's excellent. Thank you, Dwayne. So look, as I reflect on the conversation, first I want to say a big thank you to Jill, Ida, Nando, and Dwayne for a fascinating conversation. I think the insights you shared were really enlightening and also for us, right? As we continue down this journey as McKinsey, doing the research on this and figuring out a path forward. I think your inputs have been really helpful. So thank you for that. I walk away with a few thoughts, right? Number one, I think, Ida, you made the point around let's not look at the traditional pathway. There are different pathways to, the certifications, there's 4-year degrees, 2-year degrees, whatever you, but, as we think about the pathways in tech, let's be open-minded and think about all of them. We also had a dialogue around investing in the kids, right? So, whether it's corporates, whether Nando, it's things like what you're doing, but how do we invest in the kids early on, generate that interest, get them excited in tech, what have you in STEM broadly, right? There's something about personal commitment as role models. Jill, I loved what you said around that, right? How do we all in organizations role model what it takes to actually scale this? And then we also talked a lot about corporates need to, one, invest in building the talent pipelines, be clear about the skill sets they need, have the right metrics. Dwayne, you talked about getting away from DEI, really having a more value-driven strategy around how you build the right pipeline, because we know that diversity matters, right? We know that if you get the right mix of people in the organization, it actually drives better results for the organization. So how are you more deliberate as an organization on your recruiting strategy, whether it's investing, recruiting from HBCUs or wherever, but really investing in the pipelines to be successful. So lots of nuggets to take away. I'm sure I didn't cover all of them. Obviously, there were lots of ideas we talked about, but I thought fascinating. Thank you. Really appreciate the inputs, and hopefully everybody enjoyed the presentation from Horace and then the conversation we just had. We're right on time.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Have
All
a
right.
great day, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.